So, we all think we know the story of penicillin, right? Messy lab, a bit of mold, a lucky accident, and boom, modern medicine is born. But what if I told you that's only like half the story? What if this world-changing discovery was actually ignored for a decade? And what if the guy who discovered it also gave us a super eerie warning that we're just now finally starting to listen to? Yeah, let's dig into the real story of Alexander Fleming.
I mean, look at this. This right here is one of the most powerful weapons in modern medicine. But the path from this little Petri dish to a drug that saved millions, well, it was anything but a straight line. This wasn't some lone genius having a eureka moment. No, this was a story of incredible persistence, teamwork, and honestly, a whole lot of struggle.
And Fleming himself said it best. He was like, I certainly didn't plan to revolutionize all medicine. And that just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It perfectly captures how this whole thing started. He wasn't trying to change the world. He was just a really sharp, maybe a little messy, researcher who was smart enough to see the massive potential in a happy little accident.
Okay, so to really get why penicillin was such a big deal, we have to go back. We have to understand what the world was like before it. Let's take a look at the massive, deadly problem that Fleming was trying to crack.
So, picture this. It's World War I. Fleming is a captain in the Royal Army Medical Corps, right there on the Western Front. And he's seeing this horrifying thing happen over and over again. It wasn't always the bullets that were killing soldiers. It was the infections that came after. If a soldier got a deep wound and it got infected, their chances of survival were less than 50-50. Sepsis was the real enemy, and Fleming just knew there had to be a better way.
And this tells you Fleming wasn't just some guy watching from the sidelines. He was in the thick of it, researching this problem, and what he found was shocking. The go-to treatments back then, these really harsh chemical antiseptics, were actually making things worse. Turns out, they were wiping out the body's own defenses, the good cells, even faster than they killed the bacteria. So he was on this quest for a magic bullet, something that could zero in on the bad germs without hurting the patient.
Which brings us to a really interesting part of the story, one that usually gets skipped over. See, years before the whole penicillin thing, Fleming had another accidental discovery. It was kind of a preview of what was to come. Okay, so get this. It's 1922, 6 years before penicillin. Fleming has a cold, and, a bit of his nasal mucus drips onto one of his bacteria plates. And he sees that whatever was in that mucus was actually dissolving the bacteria. He just discovered a natural enzyme he called lysozyme. And the best part? To get more of this stuff, his team literally got paid 3 pence for their tears. How amazing is that? But even with this cool find, it barely made a splash in the scientific world. So, why was lysozyme a dud while penicillin became a legend? Well, the difference was everything. Lysozyme, it turns out, only killed bacteria that were basically harmless anyway. It was a neat trick, but it wasn't going to cure anybody. Penicillin, though? Oh, penicillin was a stone-cold killer. It went after the big, bad pathogens, the stuff that caused pneumonia, scarlet fever, sepsis, the real monsters.
And that brings us to the main event, September 1928, the moment that has gone down in history. This is the story of that famous moldy Petri dish.
Right, so this was Fleming's lab, famously messy. And true to his reputation, he heads off on vacation, leaving a bunch of culture plates just sitting on his bench. When he gets back, he starts sorting through them and notices one is contaminated. A little bit of mold is growing on it. But it wasn't the mold itself that was interesting. It was what was happening around it.
And his reaction was so famously low-key. He just looked at it and said, "That's funny." Funny because all around this mold, the deadly staph bacteria, it was just gone, wiped out, as if it was dissolving. An assistant who was there said Fleming immediately made the connection, saying, "That's how you discovered lysozyme." He knew in that instant that this was something huge. He'd call this mold juice penicillin.
All right, now this is where the storybook version ends, and the real, kind of frustrating story begins. You'd think everyone would be throwing parades, right? A huge breakthrough? But nope. Instead, what followed was nearly a decade of, well, crickets. Almost total disinterest.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's just one missed chance after another. 1929, Fleming publishes his findings. Nobody really cares. 1930, a doctor actually uses this stuff to cure eye infections, and the news goes nowhere. See, the big problem was that Fleming just couldn't purify it. He couldn't make enough of it to be useful. By 1936, people had basically forgotten about it. It's insane, but as late as 1941, a major medical journal was still calling it not possibly useful.
Think about that. The miracle cure that would save millions of lives was dismissed as just a laboratory curiosity. Because nobody could figure out how to make it in large quantities, it was pretty much abandoned. The single most important discovery of the 20th century was just sitting on a shelf collecting dust.
So, what finally changed? Well, two things: World War II and a team of absolutely brilliant scientists at Oxford who dug up Fleming's old research and decided to give it another shot. And this next part just shows you how far off the radar Fleming's discovery had fallen. When the Oxford team, guys named Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, started their work, someone mentioned Fleming was coming to visit. And one of the researchers, Ernst Chain, just goes, "Good God, I thought he was dead." Can you believe that? They literally thought the guy who discovered penicillin was dead. That's how forgotten this whole thing was.
So this Oxford team basically picked up where Fleming left off and did what he couldn't. First, Ernst Chain and another brilliant guy, Norman Heatley, cracked the code on how to purify it and make it stable. Then Howard Florey led the charge on testing, first on animals, then on people, proving this stuff was the real deal. And finally, their entire lab turned into a sort of makeshift factory, trying to figure out how to make tons of it.
And the results were just staggering. With the pressure of World War II, they took penicillin from this obscure lab curiosity to a mass-produced lifesaver. By the time D-Day rolled around in 1944, they've made enough of it to treat all the wounded Allied soldiers. It saved an unbelievable number of lives.
You know, Fleming himself was always super modest about his role. He even called all the attention he got the Fleming myth, and he always insisted the Oxford team were the real heroes. And this quote from Sir Henry Harris just sums it up perfectly. It wasn't one guy, it was a team, a whole chain of brilliant people, and if you took any one of them out of the equation, it wouldn't have happened.
So it seems like a happy ending, right? They all share the Nobel Prize, millions of lives are saved, the world is changed forever. But there's one last twist to this story, a really chilling warning that Fleming himself delivered, one that we're only now really starting to understand.
So in 1945, Fleming, Florey, and Chain all shared the Nobel Prize. And it was totally deserved, the ultimate validation for changing the course of human history. But when Fleming gave his Nobel acceptance speech, he didn't just look back at their success. He looked forward, into the future. And what he saw was both incredible and incredibly disturbing.
Just listen to what he said back in 1945. He basically predicted the rise of antibiotic resistance. He warned that if people misused this miracle drug, if they took too little of it or stopped their treatment too soon, they would essentially be training the germs to fight back, to become resistant. On the very day he was getting medicine's highest award, he was already warning us about the biggest threat to it.
And that really leaves you with a powerful question, doesn't it? The man who gave us this miracle drug, who started the antibiotic age, did he also warn us about a crisis that we're only now, decades later, truly beginning to face? His story isn't just about a lucky accident. It's about how real change happens, with persistence, with teamwork, and with the foresight to see the challenges that lie ahead.